Cavalry are officially a dead troop in Rise of Kingdoms. As of right now, I want to say Cavalry are the worst troop in the game by a substantial amount. Compared to the infantry and compared to archers right now, Cavs are just not in the same ballpark. They're very outdated and they've got a lot of issues. So today I'm going to discuss when Cavalry were the meta, what was so good about them, what their problems are now, what do Cavalry need, and will they be meta again? So if you're interested in why Cavalry are a dead troop and how to fix them, you need to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today by going over the history of cavalry units, and I will just start by quickly saying I might be a little bit wrong on some of the releasing here, but in terms of when commanders were meta, everything should be about right. But let's just start off right back really in the beginning of the game with Minamoto, Cao Cao, and all the epic Cav commanders. These 5 or 6 commanders were really good when they first came out. I mean, Belisarius has also always been decent, Bypass has always been decent, and Pelagius has always been decent. For KVK 1, and most players, if they wanted to be a Cav main, could certainly run them. But really, when it comes down to the cavalry history, we'll mainly care about the legendary commanders. And out of all the commanders that ever released, Minamoto has always been one of the most game-changing ones, because he costs no gold heads, you can get him right at the start of the game, and he's extremely powerful. I mean, Minamoto has always been a controversial commander since you can only buy him, but there's no doubt that he's strong. He's got a very powerful kit for a commander that costs money, and when he was first released, he would arguably have been the strongest, or maybe the second strongest commander in the game, second to YSG. So Minamoto has always been a meta commander, and back when he was released with Cao Cao, they were really overpowered. I mean, at the time, they were the best Cav March in the game. If you were anybody who was spending money, you were running this March, and it was just a meta position for Cavs. They were not the absolute meta. A lot of people ran YSG, but even then, Minamoto YSG was a very common combo, because YSG was so overpowered back then, you could put him with any troop type, and Cavs were the fastest. So Cavalry have always been in that meta position, even from the beginning. After that, you had the release of Saladin, and even Genghis Khan. At the time of Genghis Khan's release, he was super powerful. He had a chance to double cast his active skill, which was unseen, and he had a cheaper active skill cost. Once again, an unseen mechanic. So Cavs were also extremely powerful at the time of Genghis Khan and Saladin Genghis Khan was the best rally for a very long time. I mean, it was better than most of the infantry, it was better than most of the archers as well, and Saladin was extremely tanky. He had a march speed reduction too, and a healing reduction, which really was the beginning of the downfall for Richard. And like I said, the skill damage reduction on Saladin was insane, and he was probably meta, at least strong, until about a year or two ago, and he was like maybe 4 or 5 years old, so he lasted quite a while, especially for a KVK2 command. He might actually have been meta for about 3 or 4 years until he kind of started to fall off. After that, we saw the release of commanders like Attila and Takeda. I mean, if anyone was playing at the original release of Attila Takeda, I personally wasn't, but I've heard the horror stories of how powerful this combination was. It was so strong that Lilith nerfed it. This commander pairing was actually nerfed just because of how well they synergized and how meta-breaking they were. You can even see the impact of how strong Attila Takeda was through the commanders that were released in the following months. Commanders like Artemisia, who take extra skill damage, as you can see here, but they get a massive boost out of it. And when you look at Attila and Takeda, they don't deal any skill damage. It's quite obvious that Lilith was trying to counter Attila Takeda, but also not destroy infantry with the release of a commander like Artemisia. So Attila Takeda was so strong that really if you didn't own it, you didn't own any commanders, and I think that right now, even in this meta, Attila Takeda is still usable, and it's been nerfed. I mean, this is the only commander pairing I've ever seen that Lilith actually nerfed. They've never buffed the commander, but this is the only time they've ever nerfed anyone. I've never actually seen a commander nerfed. I mean, actually, I think that Thutmose got a small buff, but that was really negligible. But Attila Takeda was so meta, they nerfed it because it was just that overpowered. So quite simply, Attila and Takeda, they were in the meta as well. As you can see so far by these trends, Cavs have always been in the meta. William, Chandragupta, Zhang Yu, and I mean, Jadwiga was a meta garrison, but we're going to ignore garrisons today, mainly focusing open field. So William, Chandragupta, Zhang Yu, they were all meta commanders as well. William is still a decent commander in the current meta, and once again, he released a very long time ago. We can check exactly when these commanders released if we go to the daily special offer. They were released very, very long ago. As you can see here, William and Chandragupta released pretty much just after the Attila and Takeda cycle, so they were probably about a year or so after, and they are still, well, at least William is still a very, very strong commander in the current meta, so you can see, so far these Cav commanders were powerful and they lasted a while. William, meta, amazing AoE damage, really good stats, like these are still very decent stats in the current meta, and also had an amazing debuff on that active skill, making it so that troops couldn't get skill damage increases, which was really good against a lot of archers. Chandragupta had an amazing debuff as well through the Blessed Stacks and making troops have a defense and health reduction in a passive skill slot, and he had very decent damage between actual all damage increase and a massive damage factor, once again, through the Blessed Stacks. And then you had Zhang Yu, one of the most powerful Cav commanders until the release of Hao Bing, because he just dealt ridiculous AoE with an extremely fast rage cycle, and his only downside was that he was very squishy, so he was also an absolute meta commander. After all of these beasts that you've just heard about, they dropped Nevsky, once again, an absolute beast of a meta commander, crazy damage factor, ridiculous stats at the time of his release that are still completely meta today, and a fairly decent expertise. And to go with him about 8 or 9 months later, they released Joan Prime, who is arguably the best AoE commander in the game, maybe second to Zhu Lang, because she has a double active skill, 2000 damage, 3 target AoE in a fan-shaped area, and you don't even have to expertise her. I mean, that's just ridiculous amounts of Cav commanders. I've listed pretty much every Cav commander to exist that has been in the meta at some point. That is how powerful they were. Cao Cao was meta, Minamoto, Genghis Khan, Saladin, Joan Prime, Attila, Takeda, William, Chandragupta, Zhang Yu, and Nevsky. Even Hao Bing, I would say, is in the meta, but he's going to start the downfall of the Cavs. So, like I said, Hao Bing is the beginning of the downfall for Cavalry. And why do I say that he is the beginning of the downfall? Well, Hao Bing is certainly a very strong commander. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But compared to the commanders that released in the same cycle as him, it isn't really close. I mean, Hao Bing was released in the same time as the infantry commander, Liu Chu. I'm pretty sure we all know him, one of the best commanders in the whole entire game, if not the best in the game, and he was released at the same time as Hermann Prime and Ashurbanipal Pal. These commanders are arguably all better than Hao Bing, maybe besides Ashurbanipal Pal, but I can say Hermann's definitely better, and also, so is Liu Chu. These commanders are just much better, it's not even close, and I think that Hao Bing really isn't at their level. I mean, he's a good commander, but he's probably weaker than Nevsky is really the argument there. And when you think about it, Nevsky was released about 2 years before a lot of those commanders. So for Hao Bing to be weaker than Nevsky and a lot of these newer commanders to be much stronger, that is a pretty telling sign of Cavalry kind of starting to take a backseat from their absolute meta dominant position. That being said, just because of how fast the troops were, Cavalry were still fairly meta and definitely dominant at the time of Hao Bing's release, and that is still seen today. A lot of people have him expertise, a lot of people still run him, and he is still a very meta commander. So the real issues with Cavalry are kind of beginning now with Belisarius. Belisarius marks the first real dud commander that Cavalry have received, probably ever. I mean, I don't think Cavs have received a mega dud commander in their whole history, maybe besides Genghis Khan. He could be the only one, but with them came Saladin, and Saladin was not a dud at all. So out of all the commanders ever to really be released, this is the only cycle Belisarius and Eleanor, and one of the commanders is not good. Belisarius is just not at a meta level. I mean, he's good for 5 or 6 marches. I recommend him for those bigger murdables. For most players, though, he's useless. And because Cavalry are kind of lacking on very overpowered commanders right now, Belisarius is really marking the death of Cavalry right now. I don't think we're going to see as many people running 3, 4 Cav marches on the open field. I don't think we'll even see as many people running 2 Cav marches on the open field. We're probably going to start to see a lot more players move towards infantry and archers away from cavalry units. And this stems from the problem I mentioned before. Right now, Cavalry do not have the best commanders. Nevsky is starting to be outdated. If we put it fully real, Nevsky is very good, do not get me wrong, but CPO is starting to kind of fall out of the meta a little bit. Boudica's pretty much fallen out of the meta. Nevsky's also going to start to fall out the meta a little bit. He's probably dying off at the same speed as a CPO, and I would say within the next year or even year and a half, he's probably going to be fully phased out. A lot of players won't be running him. 2 years at the max, we won't really be seeing too many Nevskis. I mean, we already don't see too many Boudikas because Archer's got so many overpowered commanders. If Cav's got that many overpowered commanders, let's say Belisarius was overpowered, Nevsky probably wouldn't really be in the meta anymore, or at least Hao Bing wouldn't be in the meta. So you would have seen at least one of these two commanders fall out of the meta, and that's because they're single target damage commanders. They're not always going to be in the meta like the AoE commanders, who do usually last a little longer. But because we've seen the release of Belisarius, who isn't really that amazing, a lot of Cav players have had to stick with older commanders like Nevsky, and there hasn't really been a good AoE commander for Cavalry at all since the release of Joan Prime. That is certainly another issue with the Cavalry commanders right now, the fact that they don't have any real good AoEs. The last powerful AoE commander would have been Zhang Yu before Joan Prime, and he's like super old. He released probably, I want to say it's around the same time as Chandragupta, maybe a little bit after. So Zhang Yu is just very outdated for the current meta. His AoE isn't good enough, and Joan Prime, while she's not outdated by any means, just isn't enough AoE for anyone to fully justify running more than 2 Cav marches. Because if you run a second Cav march now, you're running William usually, and William, he's got an AoE, sure, but it's 1,500 damage to 3 targets. Zhulang has William's active skill damage and a passive skill slot. I mean, there isn't even a damage reduction between targets on Zhulang's 4th skill or 3rd skill. It's kind of like a mixture of both. So when you look at it, William just isn't at that meta level either with the damage. Yes, he's got all the utility and his stats are decent. His damage is lacking, and a lot of people say damage doesn't really matter. It does. I mean, having 1,000 less damage factor than a commander like Liu Chu is going to make a massive difference. It's really, really, really going to affect your trades, and Cavs are starting to notice that. A lot of Cav players are saying William and Hao Bing are still good. They're definitely usable, they're still working the meta, but they're nowhere near as strong as they used to be. They're not as strong as my infantry or my archer marchers, and that's because Cav's biggest problem right now is their lack of AoE and lack of new commanders. I kind of held off on making this video because I was thinking that if infantry got a bad commander, then we might see cavalry in a similar position. But infantry are receiving their new commander, a new William, I don't know his full name, but a William commander, who's going to have really, really good single target smite damage. And as I predicted, he's going to be pretty much an infantry Nevsky. He's going to be a really good primary that goes very well with Liu Chu, like on point, amazing combination, who's definitely going to make infantry much stronger. And that means Cavalry are going to really struggle against the new infantry, and yes, Belisarius is not going to be able to counter infantry at all, but at least you would have expected him to have something against Smite. There is 0 in his kit against Smite commanders, and with a new single target Smite commander coming out, Belisarius is pretty much screwed, Hao Bing is pretty much screwed, there's no normal damage reduction in his kit, and even Nevsky is pretty screwed, there is no normal damage reduction in his kit. Yes, he has all damage bonuses, and he has all these Cav defensive stats, but when you get hit with tons of damage from active skills, it's still going to definitely hurt his trades at a very high level. So because Cavalry didn't receive a very meta commander, and infantry are receiving a meta commander, Cavs just are not in a good position. The final thing that would really seal their fate is if archers received an OP commander. I mean, I don't think archers will. I think archers are going to receive a dud this year, or someone that's not too overpowered, because the last couple of years we've seen some OP commanders. We've had Zhulang, we had Boudica, Henry, and then we had a Shirbanipal and Herman. I mean, these 2 commanders, or really these 4 commanders I just mentioned, they're so overpowered, 5 commanders, sorry, that I think that we're going to be in market at least for some type of a mid or average commander at the best. So Cavalry are really going to be in a bad position if archers do receive something meta. If we receive another AoE commander, they're screwed. If we receive a smite damage commander, they're royally screwed. So it really, finally for Cavalry, does come down to the archer release, because Cavs already are not going to be in a good position after this new infantry release. This new infantry commander is going to make Liu Chu, one of the best commanders in the game, even better, and I would say literally make him the best commander in the game. So with the new infantry commander coming out soon, and Cavalry's biggest problem being their lack of meta commanders, I want to say that Cavalry are a really, really dead troop who aren't really able to counter anything in the current meta. So now the question comes down to, what do Cavs really need? I know Cavalry aren't as dead as infantry used to be. I've made a video for infantry when they were fully dead. I mean, there was a point where the only march people ever ran for infantry was Guan and Scipio, and if you ran 2 infantry marches, it was pretty much unplayable. But nowadays, you can easily run 2 infantry marches. I think we will start to see 3 infantry marches after William releases, but I think Cavs are starting to reach that position as well, where really you just run a Nevsky and a Joan, and if you really want 2 Cav marches, you can do Hauche being William or Hauche being Belisarius, but it's not recommended. It probably won't be in my recommended until you look at like 5 marches or 6 marches. So when it comes down to what cavalry need, they need an AoE commander. I think that's just the simple answer. They need a good solid AoE commander who can go well with Hauche Bing, or it can go well with Nevsky. Either one of those will be a powerful commander, and I think that Cavs are going to need 2 years worth of commanders before we really see something start to change. Cavs will need something at the level of Joan Prime, I'd say, with a really good AoE, and something a little bit unique about them, like Joan's double active skill, that really only Genghis Khan had before Joan Prime, and I guess Herman Prime nowadays, but I just want to say that Cavs kind of need that AoE, and they definitely need a stronger, better primary than Nevsky. I think Infantry's Commander William is really showing what Cavs need. They need another single target, very tanky, stat-heavy commander who can definitely boost some of these AoE commanders to a higher standard. The primary commanders are always replaceable. That's really the moral of the story there. Your primary commander is always going to be able to be replaced, and they should be replaced to boost your AoE commanders, who usually aren't as replaceable. It'll take you 2-3 years before you replace an AoE commander, but for 2 marches, your primary commanders should be replaced every 1.5 years or so. So when we look at it like this, Cavs need another AoE commander better than William, and that's what they need the most right now. And after that, they're going to need a new primary commander to replace Nevsky or replace Hauche Bing. I think that's the real simple solution for Cavs. It'll bring them back in the meta, and it will definitely make them more powerful. Unlike infantry, who had a lot more issues, the actual cavalry troop itself is really strong. Like the literal troop, it's the fastest in the game, it's got decent stats, and they've got an okay civilization. They've got Byzantium, which is actually alright, because you get some hospital capacity, and you get Cav health, and you get your special unit, and you can also run Ottomans with the Cavs. So Cavs don't have that very big issue that infantry did, where they struggled in their meta position just because the troop itself was bad. Infantry as a concept didn't work originally, I mean with the very slow march speed and trying to be tanky, but Cavs are very fast, and they're slightly glass cannon, and that definitely works in the current meta. Fast, punchy, slightly glass cannon is perfectly fine. So when we look at Cavs, I would expect them just to really get better commanders to put them back into the meta. So now the last question I want to answer is, will Cavs be meta again? And like I said before, the answer is yes. I think Lilith will bring Cavs back into the meta, but I'm pretty sure it was a deliberate move to kick them out for a little bit. Cavalry was so dominant for quite a while, where really all you would see on the open field was Cav marchers, and that's why we saw so many overpowered archer commanders. It was so they could keep up against the Cav meta, because Cavs are very hard to attack against. If you really want to kill a Cav commander, it's almost impossible because they just run away, but infantry and archers, they're very catchable on the open field. You can catch them off guard, you can usually kill an archer march if you catch it off guard, you can usually kill an infantry march if you catch it off guard. But if you catch a Nevsky off guard, you can maybe get like 2 skill cycles on him and then he's gone, at like the best if you're super lucky. So Nevskys and Cavalries, they've always been really good at hit and run, and that's the open field meta. So Lilith is clearly noticing that these commanders are too overpowered. They were just kind of very, very, very dominant, and they're starting to kick him out the meta. They release Belisarius, who's okay, but he's just not game-breaking. They release Hauche Bing, who's good, but not at the meta level. And then you've got Nevsky and Joan, who are very old, and they're going to start to fall off within 2 years. So Cavs are going to need a full cycle of new commanders before I would say they're even near meta again, and then they're probably going to need a whole extra cycle after that to take the rank 1 troop spot. So that means I reckon archers are going to start to fall out of the meta very soon, because Lilith is going to notice Cavs are doing bad, let's give them new commanders, give archers some weaker commanders, it'll balance out the meta. But that means we're going to probably see a very infantry-dominated meta coming up very soon, and that is my real prediction for the game as well. So I think we're going to see Cavs at the bottom, they're going to start to get some new commanders, archers will fall down to the bottom, and infantry will rise to the top. That's probably how it's going to go in the upcoming meta over the next 2 or so years, and that will shift once we see more cavalry commanders, where it will probably go back to infantry at the bottom, archers in the middle, and Cavs at the top. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, I just want to ask you guys to join my Discord server. I very much like making these meta speculation videos, and sometimes I do a little bit of speculating on the server whenever people message me about the future of the game. So if you want to ask me questions about the future of the game, do a little bit of hypothesizing with me, or you just want to be notified whenever I upload my newest video, consider joining the Discord. You can also ask me or people questions there about the game, commanders you should invest in, or even about your account. The link to the server will be in the pinned comment and also in the description. Trust me, you want to check it out, and if you don't like it, you can always leave. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.